Hello and welcome to this top-down engine tutorial. I'm Renaud from the mountains, and today we're going to have a look at how we can create a character inside the top-down engine. So agents in the top-down engine is a term used to describe any kind of characters, whether they are playable characters or enemies or NPCs, etc. There are a few core classes that make these agents work, and you'll need to get familiar with them if you want to expand and create more characters' abilities, for example. In the meantime, this video will really focus on the basic concepts, and that will allow you to quickly generate and create your own character, whether it's a player-controlled one or an AI. So let's have a look at what makes a character work in the top-down engine. So the first thing to know is right now I am in the Loft 3D demo scene, so obviously it's a 3D scene, and it's a scene where I can move around and shoot at stuff. It's all good, but the top-down engine is designed to work for both 2D and 3D projects. The components you use to create characters for one setup or the other will be mostly the same. The only difference when some components only work for 2D or for 3D, you'll find that they have 2D or 3D in their name. So that should help pick one or the other. I'm gonna select my character here. So it's called Suspenders because of his fashion choices. And you can see we have a bunch of components, actually quite a few on our inspector here. So let's go over them and maybe see what they do. So the capsule collider, first and foremost, is used for collisions. It's what's going to define the space our character occupies in the world. Then we have the character control that we are going to use to actually move the character. It's a base component that comes with Unity, but in our case it's going to be enhanced by the top-down controller 3D. But before that we have a rigid body. The rigid body is used to provide basic interaction with standard physics, and I wouldn't recommend playing with these values unless you really know what you're doing. Then we have what actually makes our character move. So that's the top-down controller 3D. As you can see, this one has 3D in the name, and you guessed it, there is a 2D equivalent right here. So on this one, you'll be able to define the gravity. So let's say I put 10 and move my character up. You can see it falls relatively slowly, but now at 40, it falls quite fast. If I say 80, boom. I like 40, but really pick whatever you want. Other tutorials and the documentation will let you know how all that good stuff works, but basically the top-down controller is responsible for handling collisions, movement, and really all the base methods, APIs, to move around. So that's where you will define whether you move on fixed update or update, how velocity is transferred, or your layer mask. So you want to consider this layer ground as the ground, and you want well, wrong click. I really don't like this drop down. You will have obstacles ground and obstacle doors and enemies as obstacles. You can define impact fall off, push power to push stuff around. You can define how you fall and how you walk on steep surfaces. Then the last really important piece of the puzzle is the character component. So this one is the central class that will link all the others. It doesn't do much in itself, but really acts as a central point. That's why you'll define if the player is an AI or a player character type. So right here, in this case, it's a player, but if I wanted it to be an AI-driven character, I would obviously choose AI. And that's also where you link the animator and the model. And we'll get back to that in a few moments. And then we have at the bottom, we have our health component. That's not mandatory, but in most games, your agents will be able to, take damage. So the health component handles that, and gain and losses in health and eventually death. So the rest of that character is made of abilities. So these are what actually do things for your character. The rest is like the engine, and all that is what makes your character actually do stuff. So we've got character movement, which, as you guessed, lets your character move around. We've got crouch, we've got run, jump 3D actually, because there's a different jump for 2D, button activation, dash, inventory, and so on. So there will be a tutorial, and there is already a documentation page dedicated to character abilities, but just know that these are the parts that you want on your character for it to be able to do stuff, and you'll find them all in this folder, so there are more than what's on this demo character. And one last thing I wanted to show you while we are on this demo character is the hierarchy. So as you can see here, I have my suspenders character, but if I unfold that, we see that it actually contains quite a few things. So the first thing we notice is we have a suspenders at idle thing here, and that is our model. That is our model plus its animator actually. And if we unfold that, we see that there is even more. So we have a shirt that we can turn on or off. We've got shoes that we can turn on or off, and so on. So it's all the parts of the model. And the model is not at the top level. It's nested one level below. And next to that, we have a bunch of feedbacks, and feedbacks are, as the name implies, visual or audio feedbacks that get triggered by simply pressing that test button, but otherwise, you know, every time a certain event happens. In this case, this is the jump feedback. So every time I jump, you see that I have this nice chromatic aberration playing on the sides. Same for the dash, same for if I take damage, you see that my shirt here starts to flicker. So all these are part of the character, and it's really important to know that your model shouldn't be on the same level, because your model is going to be rotated around and stuff just for visuals by the logic that is at this top level. And so to make that work on the character here, you always want to make sure that you've linked your animator by doing this, drag and dropping like that, and you've linked your model. You could have your animator, whoa, I'm really bad at drag and dropping. You could have your animator on a different level than your model. It doesn't really matter, but you really want to make that connection, because otherwise the engine doesn't know what your model actually is. There are multiple ways you can create a character in the top-down engine. Today I'm going to cover the 3 recommended ones, I would say. So that would be automatic creation, creation by copy, and the components approach. All that is detailed in the documentation, by the way, but if you prefer videos, then let's go for it. I'm going to go to the minimal scene 3D, and I'm going to create a character. So I'm going to put a cube in my scene, and I'm going to go 0.5, 0.5, 1.5, for example. And I'm going to create also a capsule. I'm going to rotate it maybe 90 degrees like that. I'm going to give it some other material. So let's say, do we have something that is black? Yeah, perfect. And we're going to make it 0.5, 0.5, 0.5 like that. And we're going to put it on our character like so. So we now have a character, all right? And I'm going to parent the capsule to the cube, and I'm going to call that model. Of course, that could be a model that you dragged, that could be a sprite animation, that could be anything. And I'm going to create an empty object, and I'm going to put on that empty object, I'm going to put a correct script. All right. And I'm going to say that I want to create a player. So I want it to be controlled by me. So I'll put player 1 here. The rest could be empty for now, but I will actually already parent my model to my game object. So the first thing I want to do before that is say, hey, I want my game object to be at a height, a y of 0, and actually everything 0. And I'm going to put my model below that and make sure that all that is also at 0. And now that everything is at 0, I'm just going to adjust that so that my character seems to be touching the ground, not too high, not too low. Maybe a good way to do that would be this. I'm going to turn off the gizmos and put myself like that. So now I can adjust, and to that I have a character that sort of matches the ground. I'm also gonna remove the box colliders on my model parts. I'm actually gonna have colliders at the game level. So now that everything is ready, I'm gonna drag my model into my character model here. If I had an animator, I would do the same, of course, for the animator. And I can press the auto build player character 3D button. And as you can see, it adds a bunch of stuff, such as capsule collider, such as character controller, and so on. And if I press play on my scene, there we go. Here we are. So as you can see, I'm controlling the character that was already set for this scene, and I'm also controlling the other guy. But not everything is right. So we need to do a few tweaks. I'm gonna go back to my game object here, and I'm gonna see what I can improve. So first of all, I wanna see my capsule collider. And you can see it's a bit off because it's down in the ground. So I'm gonna make it a bit higher like that. And I'm actually gonna make it like this. Gonna say height is 1.5. And I'm gonna try to adjust that height so that it matches a bit more my character. And maybe the radius is a bit too wide, so I would say 0.3. And now we have something that is a bit better. The other thing I noticed when I pressed play was that my character wasn't... Oh, I also need to fix the character control actually. So I'm just going to apply the same offset to 72, I think it was. And I want to make that maybe 0.25, a bit smaller than the radius of the capsule collider. And so this is all right for collisions. The last thing I noticed when I pressed play is that my character wasn't actually turning around. So I want to make sure I set my character orientation 3D script correctly. And to do so, I'm going to say, hey, this is what I want you to rotate. I would need to do the same for weapons, but we'll cover that in a different video. And I'm going to say, okay, I want my model to rotate based on my movement direction. So when I turn left, it faces left and so on. And I can also define a rotation speed. So I'm going to go for smooth, and the rest is better read if you expand like so. So I'm going to say I'm going to turn at a speed of maybe 7, why not, and leave the threshold like it is. So now if I press play, again, my character is now more or less on the ground. I think the colliders could use a bit more tweaks, and it's rotating properly. And I can go up, down like that. And you can see my blue character has like instant turn, while our newly created character is a much more smooth turning person now. So I now have a working character. I could call him I don't know, Mr. Capsule. And if I wanted, I could create a prefab out of Mr. Capsule like that, by drag and dropping it into my project somewhere. Maybe not there, but you get the idea. I can then remove it from the scene, go into my level manager and say, hey, for this level, I want my main character to be Mr. Capsule. And now if I press play, you'll see that my Mr. Capsule is in my scene. It can jump, it can dash, it can run around, it can do a bunch of stuff. And I may be interested in all these abilities or maybe not. So let's say I don't want my character to crouch. I would be able to do a remove of that ability, and that'd be quite easy. And if I want to add more abilities, I just type in character, and as you can see, I have a bunch of options, and I could go with character time control, but it's already there, but by default you'll get pretty much everything that's in the box. But that's how you add and remove abilities. Another way to create a character is to copy one that you like. So to do so, we're going to move to the Koala 2D demo scene. And we're going to switch to 2D. And here we go. So let's say we press play. And you like this little dude. And you're like, okay, I want to do something like this guy. So one way to do so is, suppose you have already sprites. So I'm going to use the ones in the Grasslands demo scene, and you'll see they look a bit like, I'm not sure if I can, yeah, they look like this guy. So what we're going to do first is, into our Koala 2D demo scene, we're going to locate the prefab for our character. One way to do so is to select the level manager and say, hey, what character is used in this demo? And in this case, it's the koala. So if I just click on that, you see that it auto selects my prefab. And I'm going to duplicate that. And I'm going to say new guy. All right, so I rename my prefab and it's now called new guy. I can drag it in my scene. And of course, for now, it looks a lot like a koala. But if I unfold that, I can see I have a koala model here, and it has a bunch of stuff. So what I want to do is replace that model with some from the Grasslands demo. So I'm going to go and grab my horns blue guy, and I can't exactly remember how much of it is the idle. So I'm gonna just go and guess it's like these 5 things. And I'm gonna drag that. I'm gonna say, I don't know, I'm gonna call that horns idle, for example. And now if I select that guy and say in its sorting layer, I say character, you can see I can see it right now in my thing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and probably unpack this prefab for now. I'm gonna move this horny guy here, make sure it's at the same place as the koala, so I want to like align it like that. And I'm gonna say new guy model. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm simply gonna take everything that was inside the koala model and move it into the new guy model. And now I can remove the koala model. So all that is left to do is say, hey, on my new guy, I want to make sure the bindings are correct. So inside character, I'm gonna say animator, I don't have one for now. My character model is now new guy model like that. My character orientation 2D, I don't have anything to bind there. I think the only place we would have to bind something else would be maybe the health. Yeah, in health you want to make sure your model is properly set. And Now, if I press play, I'm actually gonna make a prefab out of that guy. So I'm gonna take my new guy, I'm gonna drag it here. Boom, I have a new guy prefab. I can remove it from that scene. I can select my level manager, take my new guy, put it in place in my player prefabs list, press play. And I now have a character that has my new animation working. It moves around, it can jump, but you don't see it because animations. It can grab, items, it can use weapons. Of course, it would probably require some work until it looks good, because this one wasn't meant to really handle guns, but you can see it's already working. So from there, I would just need to create more animations and tweak all that. But I've already got something working. So the cool thing is I can just, like when you auto create a character, you could say, hey, I don't really want a jump on that guy, and go from there and make improvements. Now, the last way to create a character is to really start from scratch. So I suppose we could do that. We're gonna stay in that Koala 2D scene because it's 2D, it's a bit simple. And we're gonna go into Koala 2D and see what our character could be. We're gonna use that circle here, and we're gonna make sure we can see it in our map. So I'm gonna put it here, make sure everything is fine. I'm gonna change the sorting layer to character so I can see it in my level, and I'm gonna put it around here. So the first thing I want to do is create an empty object, and I'm gonna call that, Mr. Circle or something. And I'm gonna start by putting its tag to player and its layer to player as well. Then I want a rigid body 2D with these settings. So that's a dynamic body type and collision detection set to continuous. And I'm gonna close that. Then I'm gonna add a top-down controller 2D. So these two things are gonna be what handle collisions and all that stuff, so movement and so on. I'm gonna make sure the ground layer is ground and the whole layer is whole, like that. And I'm gonna add a box collider 2D to my object, and to adjust my object, so I'm gonna position my object here. I'm gonna take my circle, make sure it's yeah, by the way, I need to make that 0. Make sure my circle is at the center of my object, or I could have it a bit above, maybe like so. So this is now, maybe I'm gonna just adjust like that. Perfect. So these green box here are gonna be the bounds of my object, and I'm also gonna add a sorting group and gonna say character. So this is at the top level, really at the logic level of things. And I'm gonna move my initial spawn maybe a bit like that, press play. And as you can see, we have our new guy from before, and we also have now a new our new character, Mr. Circle. And if I move around, I can see that my new guy is moving, but not the circle. And that's because we haven't started adding any character component yet. So we're gonna start with that. We're gonna start with a character, and we're gonna say, hey, this is a player character, and it's gonna be controlled by player 1. And our model is gonna be this circle front part, which I can rename into Mr. Circle model or something. Then I'm gonna also add a character movement ability, and it's all right. So I can just press play. And now, as you can see, I am moving and controlling my two characters at once, and they can now have a lot of fun together. So let's say I want to make this new Mr. Circle my main character. I would just have to find a prefab folder somewhere, maybe here. Say, hey, Mr. Circle, you're now a prefab. I can then remove it from the scene, select my level manager, and say here, my player prefab is now going to be Mr. Circle. And so when I press play, it's going to be instantiated on this initial spawn checkpoint. And that's it. I now have a character that can pick up stuff and do things. So for now, the only ability it has is character movement, so it can't do much, but you can see that it already takes teleporters, won't be able to use any weapon, won't be able to pick anything from its inventory, won't be able to crouch or jump or do stuff like that, or dash for that matter, but you could add all these abilities one by one, or copy that from another character. So yeah, these are all the ways you can create characters in the top-down engine. Of course, from there we would have to add animations, we would have to add more abilities, weapons maybe, but that will be described in other tutorials. I hope you learned something new today, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.